In October 1962, a 19-year-old airman watched a Miami supermarket get stripped to the walls in 4 hours while the radio talked about missiles in Cuba. 64 years later, last Friday, the same man stood in the same kind of aisle and watched it start again. His grandchildren thought the empty shelves meant the world was ending. He knew better. He knew they meant it was Saturday, roughly hour 14, and that the ammunition would sell out by Sunday breakfast. Because panic is not chaos, panic is a schedule. It buys the same things in the same order at the same hours every single time. A man who has watched the schedule run once can read it like a train timetable. This is the story of one weekend in February 2026 when a headline sent a country to the stores, and of the 82-year-old who walked his grandchildren through it with a full pantry, a calm voice, and a list he had finished in September. To read that weekend, you first have to read October 1962, 13 days when the Cold War stopped being cold in theory. On the evening of October 22, the president went on television and told the country that Soviet missiles were being assembled 90 miles from Florida. Walt Briggs was 19, stationed outside Miami, and off duty the next morning. What he saw that morning was not fear the way the movies show it. It was orderly, quiet, and absolutely relentless. Housewives with lists, station wagons idling at the curb, canned goods, powdered milk, bottled water, candles. The shelves went in hours. The government had spent a decade printing civil defense pamphlets about fallout and shelters. Almost nobody had read them. Now everyone wanted the pamphlet, the shelter, and 2 weeks of food, all in the same afternoon. In some towns, grocers rationed sugar by the pound. Florida gas stations ran dry by Wednesday. And 19-year-old Walt, standing in the noise with his pay in his pocket, could not find one flashlight battery in 3 stores. Then 13 days after it started, the ships turned around and the missiles went home. Here is the detail Walt never forgot. The shelves refilled within a week, and everyone quietly went back to believing it could never happen again. He kept 2 things from October 1962, a civil defense pamphlet he finally read cover to cover twice, and a habit. From that month to this one, his house has never held less than 3 weeks of everything. 64 years of quiet groceries, no bunker, no camouflage, just a pantry that never quite empties and a rule he says like a joke, buy boring things on boring days. Now February 2026, 2 days before that Friday, the last nuclear arms treaty between Washington and Moscow had quietly expired, and for the first time since 1972 there were no limits and no inspections left on the world's 2 biggest arsenals. That part is real. Almost nobody noticed. The expiry ran below the sports scores, the way these things do. The world went a week without guardrails and the weather was fine. Then Friday, 6:47 in the evening, every phone in every pocket buzzed with the same wire story. A major nuclear power announcing it would resume live warhead testing within the month. What happened across America in the next 72 hours had nothing to do with missiles, and Walt saw every hour of it coming. The grandchildren were at his house for the weekend. Danny, 12, saw it first, on the tablet he was not supposed to have at dinner. He read the words out loud twice and looked up. His grandfather kept buttering bread. Walt asked one question. Does it say a bomb went off or that somebody plans to prove one still can? Danny read it again. Plans to. Walt nodded and said the 4 words that shaped the whole weekend. Then we have time. Understand what he understood. A test is not an attack. It is theater with seismographs. But he also knew the difference would be invisible to a scared country by morning, because fear does not read past the first line. So he did the strangest thing anyone in America did that evening. Nothing. He washed the dishes, phoned his daughter to say the kids were fine, and let the flannel shirt calm do its work. Panic runs on faces. His was closed for business. By 9, the television had experts. By 10, the experts had maps. And in the parking lot of the big box store out by the interstate, the first pickup trucks were already idling in the dark, waiting for the Saturday shift to unlock the doors. Saturday, 7:58 in the morning. Walt took the kids along on purpose, not to shop, to watch. Some educations cannot be scheduled, he told their mother on the phone, and this one only runs every few decades. Hour 2 of any panic, and it is always water. Pallets of it gone before 9, not because anyone did the math on municipal supply. Because water is the first thing the movies taught everyone to grab, and a crowd shops from the same movie. Danny asked the smart question, is the water actually in danger? Walt said no. The tap will run all weekend. That is the first law of panic buying. It does not buy what the emergency needs. It buys what the fear recognizes. Hour 6, fuel. By early afternoon, the gas stations had lines around the block, horns, and one fist fight that made the local news. America has rehearsed this one recently. In 2021, a single pipeline outage emptied pumps across the southeast in about 2 days. Walt drove past the whole thing without slowing. His tank had been full since September, because his rule for fuel is his rule for everything. The cheapest gas in any crisis is the gas already in your tank. Hour 12, canned goods and bread. By Saturday evening, the camera crews had found the empty aisles, which is the moment every panic doubles. A photograph of a bare shelf does something a headline cannot. It says, "The others know something you do not. Hurry." By 10 that night, every pharmacy within 30 miles was out of potassium iodide. Europe ran this exact play in March 2022, when shelling near a Ukrainian reactor sold out iodine tablets from Warsaw to Lisbon in days. Useful against one isotope in one narrow window, mostly for the young. The crowd did not ask. The empty shelf was the argument. For the record, here is everything Walt bought during the great panic of that Saturday. A carton of eggs and a bag of sugar. Because Sunday is pancake day at his house, and no headline had said anything about pancakes. By Sunday breakfast, right on his prediction, came the ammunition. But before Sunday, you need to see the list itself. Because once you have seen it, you can never unsee it in any crisis again. Walt wrote it out for the kids on the back of a feed store flyer from memory, before the weekend confirmed every line. Hour 2, water. Hour 6, fuel. Hour 12, canned food and bread. Day 2, ammunition. Day 3, generators and propane if the fear lasts that long. Why the same order everywhere every time? Because a panicked crowd is not 1,000 thinkers. It is one nervous animal with a shared memory, and it buys survival in story order. Thirst, escape, hunger, defense. The story was written by every disaster film since 1954. And why do the shelves empty so fast? Because they were never full. A modern supermarket holds about 3 days of stock and refills itself nightly from warehouses on wheels. The system is a river, not a lake. Panic does not drain it. Panic just drinks faster than it flows. You watched this exact machinery in 2020 over toilet paper of all things. Nobody needed a year's supply, but everyone saw everyone else's cart, and a crowd buys what it sees missing. Mimicry, not math. The shelf empties because it is emptying. Sunday morning, Danny asked what Walt had bought back in September when he supposedly got ready. Walt opened the pantry and said, "Nothing. It was already here. Getting ready is not an event, son. It is a speed you live at." The tour took 10 minutes, 2 weeks of food they actually eat, oldest cans in front, water in jugs refilled twice a year, a battery radio, a cash envelope. Nothing in the whole pantry would look strange in any grandmother's kitchen, and that is the point. Compare receipts. Walt's September groceries cost pennies over normal, spread across boring Tuesdays. The Saturday crowd paid triple for water, waited 4 hours for gas, and one man in town paid $200 for a $50 camp stove out of a truck bed. Panic pays retail plus fear. Sunday, 8:40 in the morning, day 2, ammunition, right on the timetable. The line outside the sporting goods store formed an hour before opening, quiet men with coffee, not looking at each other. Walt's verdict was gentle. They are not buying defense, they are buying a feeling. And here is the thing the feeling costs. Every dollar and every hour spent chasing the schedule is $1, and an hour not spent on the one thing panic cannot buy. Hold that thought. It is the whole reason this story exists. Sunday noon, the turn. The wire services carried a new line. Consultations, a test postponed pending talks, diplomats flying. Nothing was resolved, nothing ever had been. But the sentence sounded like an exhale, and the country wanted to exhale. By 2 in the afternoon, the parking lots were half empty. Panic is social. It feeds on the sight of other people panicking, and when the crowd thins, the signal dies. The stampede does not stop because the danger passed. It stops because the show closed. Sunday evening, the aftermath began arriving in garages. 60 cases of water and no place to stack them. Freezers bought with no wiring to run them. Whole carts of canned goods in households that did not own a can opener. The return lines on Monday would run longer than the buying lines on Saturday. Walt's neighbor Gary came by at dusk, a little sheepish, with a trunk full of iodide he did not know the dosage for. Walt poured him coffee, copied the list onto an index card, and sent him home with the only prescription that works. Next time, be done in September. By Monday, the gas stations were full again. The trucks had never stopped rolling. That is the quiet punchline of the whole weekend. The supply never failed. The nerve did. It was never a shortage of goods. It was a shortage of composure. 60 hours start to finish. That was the whole national emergency. Now come out to the porch, because that is where the real lesson of the weekend got said, and it is older than the treaty and bigger than the headline. June asked it straight, the way 9-year-olds do. "Grandpa, were you scared in 1962? He rocked once and told the truth. All 13 days. Anyone who says otherwise was not paying attention." Then he gave them the sentence he had carried for 64 years, the one he got from watching an airbase and a supermarket panic in the same week. Fear is fine. Fear is fuel. Fear with a list is called preparation, and fear without one is called Saturday. Here is what the archives later showed about 1962. The world stood closer to the edge than even the president knew, decisions hanging on single officers in single submarines. And still, the store shelf panic burned out in under a week. Fear peaks before facts, always, both directions. So what is the one thing panic cannot buy? Time. A plan is nothing but decisions made early, and by hour 2 of a crisis, early is the only thing sold out forever. The crowd in that water aisle was not buying bottles. It was trying to buy back September. Danny pushed once more, but what if it had been real? Walt nodded, because that is the right question. Then the list works exactly the same, he said. The plan does not need to know the cause. It only needs to exist before the headline does. Monday morning, school buses running, aisles refilling from the overnight trucks, gas at Tuesday prices. The town stepped back into its routine and began the oldest ritual of all, pretending the weekend had not happened. Walt had seen that ritual before too. The shelves refill, the memory empties. Forgetting, it turns out, is on the schedule as well. It is the last item, and the crowd buys it in bulk. So before their mother came to collect them, Walt sat the kids at the kitchen table with paper, and the 3 of them wrote the family plan. June did the lettering in red crayon, which he declared the correct color for the subject. Line 1, water, 1 gallon per person per day, 2 weeks' worth, filled and dated at home for pennies, because the aisle at hour 2 is a place their family does not go. Line 2, 2 weeks of food you already eat, not survival bricks, chili, rice, peaches, the boring rotation. Oldest to the front, 1 extra of everything with each normal shop until the pantry carries itself. Line 3, the envelope and the radio. Small bills for a week of groceries and a battery radio, because in 1962 the truth arrived by radio while the rumors arrived by neighbor, and that ratio has never really changed. Line 4, the full tank rule and the meeting point. The truck never goes below half. And if the phones ever fail, everyone walks to the white church on Miller Road and waits, because a family that knows where to stand does not need to call anybody. And line 5, in the old man's own hand at the bottom, buy boring things on boring days. The whole philosophy in 7 words. Panic shops at the top of the market. Peace shops at the bottom. Choose your prices. Their mother arrived at 5 and stood a long moment in front of that refrigerator. She had spent Saturday in a water line 2 towns over. Nobody said anything. 3 generations read the same page, and the youngest 2 had written it. Here is what remains true after the fiction fades. The treaty really did expire on February 5, 2026. The guardrails really are gone for the first time in 54 years. The next unnerving headline is not a possibility. It is in production. And when it lands on some ordinary Friday at 6:47 in the evening, the schedule will run again. Hour 2, water. Hour 6, fuel. Hour 12, cans. Day 2, the quiet line at the gun counter. You now hold the timetable. That was the entire point of the weekend. Because the crowd in the aisle is not stupid, it is late. Panic buying is just preparation arriving after the deadline, at 10 times the price in the worst hour against strangers. Everything they grabbed that Saturday, you can own by Friday for almost nothing. Walt's final arithmetic, the one he made Danny repeat back twice. The government cannot mail you composure. The store cannot sell you time. And the crowd cannot lend you a plan, because by the time the crowd exists, plans are out of stock. So this week, not next, 1 case of water and 1 extra of everything you already eat, every normal shop until 2 weeks stand in your pantry. An envelope of small bills, a $20 radio, a meeting point your family can walk to. None of it will feel like survival. That is how you know it is working. For the record, here's everything Walt bought on Monday when it was all over and the shelves stood full again. Nothing. It was already there. It had been there since September. It will be there next Friday, too. In October 1962, a 19-year-old stood in a stripped aisle and made a promise to himself about Septembers. Last Friday, an 82-year-old kept it, standing in the same aisle, calm as furniture, with 2 children watching how it is done. Last Friday's panic is a scenario. The one in 1962 was not, and it ran on the same clock. The missiles went home in 1962. The headline softened last Sunday. The next one is already loading. When it lands, you will be one of 2 people, the one reading the schedule or the one running it. The aisle is open either way. Choose in September.